Hello.
Our story begins in a time between time. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, opened his eyes. He was gone. Death had consumed him. This was the afterlife? Perhaps he should have told Luke to not take his helmet off. This was kind of rubbish. He pressed himself off the ground and looked at his hand. They could replace his entire body, but not his glove? Seriously? Anakin smiled to himself as he found what he said pretty funny. He turned around and looked down a pathway that seemingly never ended. A sigh left his mouth, and he looked above himself. His eyes scanned this desolate place, wondering how exactly he got here, or why he was here to begin with. Then he felt a familiar presence. His eyes shifted around and they landed on Qui-Gon Jinn, who smiled warmly at Anakin. He asked Anakin if he had conquered his demons and brought balance to the Force. Skywalker nodded his head, looking to the left, then to the right, before coming back to Master Jinn. There were so many questions he wanted to have answered, and Qui-Gon knew that, but for right now, he told Anakin to follow along. He sped up and caught up to the old Jedi, before he was shown a portal. Qui-Gon turned to Anakin and told him to enter. His master was waiting for him on the other side. Once they were finished, Qui-Gon could teach him what he needed to learn. Anakin stepped towards the portal and the information he needed was passed into his body. He slowly appeared and he stared at his son, who joyfully smiled back. Anakin's eyes turned to the left and looked at Master Yoda and Master Kenobi next to him. He couldn't help but grin. How was this possible? He wasn't fully sure, but he was here, and more than anything, Luke was okay. And so was his sister. She had such a striking resemblance to Padme. It truly warmed his heart. The three of them didn't say a word. They simply stood and watched for several minutes as the celebrations began. The Empire had been knocked down a peg, and it was time for a new generation to take control over power in the galaxy. The rebellion was soon to be named the New Republic, and the fight for the core was about to heat up. All of that was beyond Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda. Their fight was complete. This was now Luke's burden to bear. When they abandoned the ceremony, they met Anakin in the world between worlds. Qui-Gon spoke before either Obi-Wan or Yoda could, revealing that it was Master Kenobi who had saved his life on the second Death Star, giving him the opportunity to continue his journey in the Force. Anakin was confused. He had assumed that it was finished, but it turns out he was not. Qui-Gon confirmed that beyond being a prophecy spouted by Jedi thousands of years prior to their lives, he was a being meant for maintaining balances in the Force. Yoda and Obi-Wan stood by each other's side, as Anakin and Qui-Gon stepped away. The Jedi who discovered the ability to become Force ghosts explained to Anakin everything. As a mortal being, he could no longer affect the living Force. His role was not to prevent darkness from rising for the rest of eternity. That was something impossible, because the Force is always changing, and new threats are always rising. However, as a guardian of the world between worlds, his mission was to oversee time itself. Anakin didn't quite understand, and Qui-Gon stopped, turning towards a portal, and asking him if he remembered what he had encountered on Mortis. Anakin looked through, seeing a younger version of himself, fending off the goddess of light and the god of darkness. The son and daughter had challenged him, and he was able to stop them. Mortis was a nexus of the Force, somewhere that Anakin was able to thrive. Qui-Gon explained that, had he stayed, there are several more scenarios where the Sith never rise. Of course, Palpatine was intelligent enough to find a way to win in quite a few different circumstances, but the point being, Anakin was meant to stay on Mortis. His decision to reject his duty meant instead of an eternity of life, he now had an eternity of afterlife to serve. He could not reveal the future to anyone, nor could he take the life of another. These were rules of the Force. If he broke them, then he would be at the mercy of its will. Anakin still didn't understand why things were the way they were, and Qui-Gon nodded, sympathizing with this confusion. There was much for both of them to learn, but the gift was never for Qui-Gon's to hold. Skywalker looked around the world between worlds, and his instructor told him that he was to guard this realm. The Sith, while he was Vader, tried to break into it. Young Ezra Bridger had saved Ahsoka's life with this portal, and the Force didn't want anyone intermingling with the world between worlds anymore. It was a sacred place, one meant to hold the history of the galaxy, not to dramatically change the course of it. Anakin must guard it. He must use it to pursue great wisdom, and he must be what no other could be. Qui-Gon gave some more details to Anakin regarding the nature of being a Force ghost, and how he could commune with the living if he so wished. There was a warning though. He could hurt himself if he overexerted his energy. Like the souls of the living, the souls of the afterlife were bundles of bursting energy. To use that energy was to weaken oneself. If Anakin worked against the Force, then he could incur damage to his immortal self, something that would take centuries to heal. He wished his friend peace on his journey, and enjoyment in his learning. Qui-Gon bowed and vanished before Anakin's very eyes. Now he was here alone, but instead of feeling the wallowing pain of such isolation, he felt whole. He had saved his son. It was time for him to correct himself for what he had done wrong. Months of time would pass by as Skywalker moved about within the world between worlds. It was truly a remarkable place, and he learned a lot about the universe he called home. Anakin visited the inception of the Jedi Order. He saw dark ages fall on the galaxy. He watched civilizations rise and burn, all to realize that what he had lived through was just another rhyme in galactic history. The evolution of the universe he was born into was bred through times that mirrored one another, a great circuit of who gets to be king of the hill. The Jedi were at the head of this, but they failed more than the Sith did, which was quite ironic, even to Anakin. They always had more power than the Sith, but their failures based in either complacency or foolishness forced them to deteriorate rapidly over and again. Every 1,000 years, there was new change, and it was because of this that Anakin stayed very uninvolved in the life of his son. He realized that these growing pains were absolutely necessary for the life of the Jedi Order, something Luke seemed rather hellbent on bringing back. It was kind of weird for Anakin. Had his two instructors lied to him, gone into hiding, and forced him to win their war for them, he likely wouldn't have restarted the Jedi Order. He found it a bit disrespectful to pin the burden on his son and daughter, and he didn't hold resentment towards them because Luke didn't. The transition between familial generations was learning where the old ones went wrong. Anakin may have simply been too impatient or too revenge-oriented. These were just many of the lessons Skywalker would come to know in the world between worlds. After a few more years passed, Anakin's own regret would start to bog him down. There was something that he came to realize over the years. Anakin spent a lot of time listening to people talk about him. He did this following his great history lesson of the universe. He started with people like Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Ahsoka. The reason he didn't go to Padme was because he feared what she would say of him. But after spending a mere day or two of listening to what she had to say about him, he realized that she wholeheartedly loved him for who he was. Padme and Anakin were tied together as closely as they could have been in their lifetimes. It made him sad that he hadn't trusted her the way he should have. Padme never had any malicious intentions because she was a loyal partner, one who loved him deeply. There was peace in knowing that he hadn't caused her death on Mustafar, another lie he had been told by Sidious. But through this journey of listening to others speak on his name, he came to respect one of the many Jedi he loathed for most of his life. Master of the Order, Mace Windu, had been one of the most compassionate members of the Council behind closed doors. While he could be a hard-ass, he didn't do it out of neglect, jealousy, or disliking. He only wished to push Anakin to become his best self. It's after all why Depa joined the Council so young into a career as a Jedi. However, like Qui-Gon instructed, instead of acting on his impulses, he continued to learn. Anakin was dedicated to the part, and the knowledge he had received already made him a gifted being. But what he hadn't done yet was investigate the future. Part of him genuinely feared it, because even Anakin knew how dangerous Palpatine could be, without knowing that he had survived. He had manipulated a Sith Lord, the Jedi Order, the entire Republic, and the galaxy throughout his entire life. That was true power. He convinced Plagueis to trust him, and he did. It led to an empire that the Sith had been dreaming of for millennia. But Anakin didn't just fear the future because of Palpatine. He feared it because it directly involved his children. He was well aware of Ben Solo's birth, and he held a lot of happiness that he had himself a grandson. But what became of him? Skywalker eventually acted and ventured into the future, seeing the return of the Sith. Balance had been restored to the galaxy, but darkness was an ever-returning problem, and Sidious had been prepared for his fall. As Anakin learned, the balance was restored through Palpatine's defeat, and he did almost die. A week into his new body almost killed him, but dark magic and Sith scientists maintained his life on Exegol, allowing him to wither away, slowly and painfully. That pure suffering is what kept Sidious alive, as it was fueling the darkness to hold on to, by just a string. Anakin couldn't tell Luke, but he also didn't necessarily need to. His son was on the correct path to finding and destroying the Emperor. Young Skywalker was searching through old Imperial databases. He was scouting supply caves and tracking down relics that belonged to the Sith Lord. Everything Luke did was the right thing, and Anakin hoped that it would lead to the right outcome. In the following few months, he would save Ahsoka and send her off to assist Luke in the destruction of the Sith and the Imperial remnant. However, something unlikely happened. In one of the many scenarios Anakin saw, he watched Ahsoka board the Chimera and return to the New Republic, with Thrawn in custody. Instead, though, she was trapped on Peridea. There was another fight for her to finish in a distant galaxy, so he stopped by to let her know that he was watching over her and her student. Anakin was proud of Ahsoka and Sabine, and he trusted the journey that they had before them. This now left him with a challenging issue, though. He had saved Ahsoka because he believed that she would continue her journey and right the wrongs of a former instructor, just like Luke. Instead, she had other forces to conquer in a different galaxy. Anakin worried for his son, not because he was incapable, but because of how capable Sidious was. The Dark Lord had bested a Jedi Master who had lived for over 800 years. Luke was a child in comparison, barely older than 30 at this point. Coming back to Anakin's regret over having betrayed Master Windu, he came up with an idea. He returned to the portal, and right as Windu was thrown out of a window, Anakin brought him into the world between worlds. All was explained to him, as it was with Ahsoka. In other words, Mace was given a choice, to live or die. He chose the former. A short engagement would commence, but instead of it being a duel, it would be a one-sided affair. Without one of his hands or lightsaber, Mace fended off Skywalker's attacks before besting him, as Ahsoka had, taking his weapon and using it against him. Anakin didn't tell Mace of the future, only of his apology, before releasing them back into the galaxy so that he could make a future for himself. Mace Windu would wake up in the executive building, 30 years removed from when he had last been here. The year was 10 ABY, and he had missed the total changing of the guard, but he didn't know that. His encounter with Skywalker was short-lived, and he understood very little of it, mostly due to the fact that he was saved after losing his hand and being electrocuted. Very jarring experience. Mace looked at his hand, realizing it was just a stub, and his saber was nowhere to be found. He looked out the unbroken window of the executive office, the one that he had just fought in. This office was no longer belonging to the Chancellor. It was a boardroom, one reconfigured after Coruscant fell to the New Republic. Mace turned and started out before being apprehended by 2 New Republic guardsmen, who questioned how he got here. Funny story. He didn't know, but he informed them that he was the Master of the Jedi Order and he had to get back to his temple now. They believed Windu was a drunkard, and because he wasn't equipped with a lightsaber or a second hand, they escorted him away. Mace had plenty of Republic-era technology and credits to prove he was a Jedi, but these guards didn't really care. He was trespassing. Mace was so unbelievably confused. He replayed everything over and again. He was betrayed by Anakin, then saved by him, before fighting his way out of a sunless void. Now he was inside the same office, but different, and being escorted by guards that weren't Senate commandos nor clone troopers. Something weird was going on. Even further, something had changed. As they walked through the halls, he stopped the guards and asked them what that symbol was on the banner. They told him it was the New Republic, the symbol of the alliance that had thwarted the evil empire. Mace asked, "What empire?" And it became readily clear to these people that he wasn't just trespassing, he was from a different time altogether. The guards escorted Mace to someone they thought could help, because she was very close to a well-known Jedi Knight. The New Republic officers weren't very familiar with the Jedi, but they knew of the legendary rebellion leader, Luke Skywalker, so surely Senator Organa Solo would be of some assistance to them. When they arrived at her offices, after getting Mace some Bacta for his stub, they were welcomed in. Leia Organa Solo was reading over a current bill to demilitarize the Alliance Navy, and she was trying to come up with a counter to it. As Leia looked up from her datapad, she saw Jedi robes, and was confused. These weren't Luke-era Jedi robes, they were Ben Kenobi's era. She told the guards to let the man go, and asked who he was. Mace explained the same thing again, and she was confused and concerned. She absolutely believed it was him, because she was very aware of the Jedi not confirmed dead following Order 66, because Luke had been looking for them. He found Cal Kestis, Ezra Bridger, and now he could finally find Master Windu. She apologized for the guard's behavior, and he didn't have a problem with it. But he was confused. Why did she look so familiar? Because he knew she wasn't an Organa. Through extensive conversations, Leia would reveal everything Mace hadn't heard about. She completely believed his story because Luke had told her of the Force ghosts he saw on Endor. Leia hadn't awakened to the Force by that point. Most of what she had was great intuition. So now, after having trained with Luke, she believed every word Mace said. She told him how to find Luke Skywalker and got him equipped with a new hand. Leia couldn't believe that Mace Windu had actually returned, and she wanted to say so much, because his return could be beneficial for what she wanted to accomplish. He was a wartime general. If he could learn enough about the time they were living in, then maybe they could stop the demilitarization of the New Republic. All a long-term plan. For now, though, Mace and Luke needed to meet each other. The Jedi Master would be given transport to an Imperial supply base on Tython. It was labeled supply base, but it was just a warehouse filled with holocrons, books, and relics from across the ages. Leia knew Luke would be there because it was a place he hadn't fully gone through yet. There were still hundreds of crates he needed to search, so he returned every few months to continue opening them up and working through them. Mace would arrive under the cover of darkness. As he was walking towards a building he had never seen before, he held his hand. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt. He would get used to it eventually, but right now it was very different. When he entered the cave, he found nothing but darkness. Without a lightsaber, he just walked around aimlessly, looking for Luke. He was surprised to hear of Anakin Skywalker having children, but at the same time, it made sense. Leia revealed that she was Padme's daughter, and it explained why she looked so familiar to him. The 30 years that he had lost were so confusing, because when he was last alive, Order 66 hadn't happened yet. The war was almost over. Had he remained alive, or not betrayed, he would have perhaps seen the rebuilding of a strong republic. Who knows? All he knew is that he didn't hold resentment over what had happened, because he understood so little of what was. During his search for Skywalker, he felt a presence that he hadn't felt since before the Federation blockade of Naboo. He turned around to see the illuminated presence of Qui-Gon Jinn. He was very confused. How was this happening? Qui-Gon smiled and stepped forward, asking if he was enjoying this new world. Mace didn't understand, and Master Din explained everything that he was able to say. Unlike Ben and Yoda, Qui-Gon and Anakin were very caring about explaining the nature of Force ghosts. They walked through the cave system, as Qui-Gon told Mace to trust the Force in his path forward. He was brought back for a reason, and while much had changed, he should see this as a sign of the positives to come from this. There wasn't much else that could be said, because it would reveal the future, so instead, Qui-Gon wished Mace to have good luck on his endeavor. It got the Jedi Master to smile, knowing that only Qui-Gon would ever say luck to him. He did dearly miss his friend. Even though they disagreed, Qui-Gon was always such a lovely presence to have around. Before ever finding Luke, Mace found a crate of lightsabers. He opened it because it called to him, but instead of seeing regular Jedi weapons, it was filled with Temple Guard staves, enough to arm the entire Temple Guard unit, thus proving that they had been destroyed by the Sith. Another echo of truth that he was unsure if he wanted to believe. Though there was no denying what this was. It was reality. As he put the weapons down, he heard some men yelling in the distance. He grabbed one of the staves and rushed around the facility. The cave system they were in housed thousands of relics, which meant that whoever was here could be any number of people. Leia hadn't been able to give Mace all the full rundown of everything yet, but this era had a rise of piracy, and with Imperial warlords lurking around the galaxy, threats were always possible. Without knowing what an Imperial warlord was, he peered around the corner in the cave. He saw a bunch of men wearing what appeared to be Phase 3 clone armor. They were digging through boxes, saying that Captain Pellaeon needed these for their project. Mace listened in, watching the individuals at work. He remembered Pellaeon. He was a good man, a naval officer who had served an acclimator called the Leveler. He supported Jedi General Ron Arkim's invasion of Merjan during the Clone War. It was one of the many missions Pellaeon had, but he was a successful operator. Mace wondered and even worried if he had betrayed the Jedi to serve the Imperial regime. As he was thinking of this, one of the troopers removed their helmets, showing a human face. Nothing like the Jango Fett clones he had served with during the Clone War. It hit him in this moment. that those clones had all likely died of natural causes by this point. He observed the troopers until he heard something about Operation Necromancer. Unsure of what it was, he took out a recording device to relay back to Leia when they were finished. However, there was one small issue. Once he stopped recording, the device beeped, alerting the stormtroopers to his presence. They turned around and opened fire blankly. Mace ignited the yellow pike and spun forward. Holding a lightsaber with metallic hand was a little weird, but he made it work, as he ripped through the stormtroopers. They were fierce in their minds, but little did that translate to actual combat. Mace was a Jedi general from a war far more intense than what these grunts had been trained for. Mace's weapon slashed through them until the leader of their group attacked him. It was a purge trooper, and Mace didn't have to worry about this individual. He threw his lightsaber down the walkway, completely missing the purge trooper. The Imperial rushed him, and before he could get within striking range, he was cut in half by the boomerang saber. Mace would clear the bodies and bury them, and still saw no sign of Luke, so he sent a recording of the Imperials to Leia, hoping that it might be able to help her with whatever struggle she was facing. It was very polarizing. He left a republic that wouldn't stop militarizing. Now she was trying to stop a republic from demilitarizing. It was kind of bizarre. Regardless, he started a meditation, leading to another interaction with Anakin. During this, he would come to realize everything he hadn't before. It seemed like such a misunderstanding of what he had been through in the past couple of hours, but it turns out he was truly in a different era. It was something he couldn't fully grasp, but he trusted the process and he thanked Skywalker for responding to him. Eventually, Mace got to meet Master Skywalker, the young boy from Tatooine. Wow, that family really has a thing for sand. Turns out Luke and Anakin were very similar to one another. Mace was truthfully joyed to meet Luke. Young Skywalker was quite confused, similarly to his sister, though he was understanding and he believed what Mace said to him. They would spend the first several minutes getting a vibe for each other before they got to the important details, like what Luke was doing and how he was restarting the Jedi Order. Mace was very impressed, but he was curious. What inspired him to restart the Jedi? Luke was unsure for a specific motive. He just knew that it was the right thing to do for the people of the galaxy. They needed the Order, and he belonged to it. He was the last of them, so it was his burden to bear. Mace pondered if this was passed down from his instructors, and a clear answer wasn't really given. It made Windu disgruntled. Why would Yoda or Obi-Wan put this pressure on Luke? Something wasn't adding up. But more on that later. They had more important tasks to attend to. The two Jedi moved from Tython to Ossus, where they would continue their discussions. This would continue on for another week or so. Mace would learn more about the galaxy he was in, and fully get a chance to understand his purpose here. It was clear that aside from Luke's mission to find relics of the past, the greatest task they had was to destroy the Empire once and for all. It wasn't the job of the Jedi to seek revenge, but this wasn't that. It was prevention. Young Skywalker had been given unfavorable cards, and he was caught up in finding the true meaning of the Jedi. For Mace, the code was important, but the strength of a Jedi lies within their heart. Luke would probably never find that if he continued looking for relics. The past would come and go, but for now, they needed to help his sister prove to the Republic that there was a threat. Luke understood, and they made a move together for the Outer Rim. Mace's sighting of the Imperial Remnant members was rare. The New Republic had done a good job at taking down Imperial loyalists when they could, but the fear was that there was something more. Leia believed that the might of the Empire was hidden, so they needed to have a means to counter it when it was revealed. Politically, she couldn't convince the Senate to put credits towards something that wasn't visible. The evidence Mace had was good, but it wasn't enough to prove that there was a large threat to the new system. So the two Jedi moved on pirate space, which didn't do them much in the way of finding Imperials, though it led to many conflicts. Luke was able to hone his skills by being around Windu. He was a remarkable warrior, and after having used the saber of the Temple Guard to make himself another amethyst blade, he was able to remind people of what the Jedi once were. Scuffles with pirates resulted in quite a few deaths, but the Jedi were freeing people once again, which meant the world to Luke. He really couldn't put it into words, but Mace showed him what the Jedi used to do before the Clone War. They helped people by being present on the micro level. Their work wasn't galaxy defining, but it defined the galaxy by one small action at a time. With the Jedi constantly acting in the Outer Rim, Imperial warlords started to become more tense. They had to cut off their alliances with pirates across the Rim, because it was no longer safe to just trust anyone. Luke and Mace were truly a threat to be worried about. But after months of searching for signs of Imperials, they were led to the planet Morac by a band of pirates supplying weapons to local marauders who targeted Imperials on the planet. The refinery that once had been destroyed by Mace Mayfield, but there were still troopers that occupied the territory, because Rhydonium was a very profitable source of income, and the Imperial remnant needed credits. Thus, Grand Admiral Thrawn sent troopers to the planet. Instead of using heavy tanks to trek across the dense jungle, the Imperial base was located at the heart of a Rhydonium mine. They dug, collected, and sent everything up to Imperial transports. Currently stationed over Morac were 3 Gladiator-class Star Destroyers, which were quite tiny, but what the remnant could afford to use. When Mace and Luke arrived, after being tipped off, they went in with the approach of learning more about the Necromancer project. They were hoping that it would lead them to the rest of the Imperial remnant. In the name, it sounded like resurrecting the Empire, and if Ezra Bridger was right about Thrawn's return, then they could be in serious trouble. Before Luke and Mace landed on the planet, they took some shots over it, showing off the Gladiator destroyers and sending R2 to return those images to the New Republic, while they made their landing procedure and hopefully finished off this mission. Inside the jungle of Morac, the 2 Jedi crouched beneath bushes and moved between trees. They kept their eyes peeled on the Imperial troopers outside the base. They had their weapons at the ready, and what the Jedi couldn't see were the heavy turbo lasers on the inside of the cave. Before they could make an attack though, Mace shoved Luke down as blaster fire filled the air. Pirates rushed in. Not the marauders from before, but genuine pirates. They were here to retake their mine. They had negotiated with the Imperials so they could both make money off of it, but the Remnant was taking more than was promised in their agreement. Luke and Mace watched turbo lasers eviscerate the ground transports used by the pirates. It was a shock because no one could see them, but something else was revealed. The caves were slowly closing, propping up ramparts on the ground level for stormtroopers to get behind, which they did. Unlike the fight with the rebels, these pirates were no match for stormtroopers. As reinforcements dumped out to fight off the approaching pirates, Luke spotted a hidden entrance, which these extra men were coming from, but they had to stay low. Among them were scout troopers, and they'd be using their snipers to pick off the Jedi if they saw them. The battle continued to intensify around them as they moved closer to the hidden entrance. Just as they prepared to enter, another heavy explosion ripped through the pirates, and the sound of waves echoing above the skies could be heard. It was nothing other than the arrival of more Imperial warships. Luke grabbed some binoculars and noted that the Chimera had arrived. Thrawn's flagship was here. Why the Grand Admiral would make a showing here was not understood to them on the surface, but behind the trees of the jungle was a pirate fleet. They were threatening the gladiators, which weren't strong enough to defend themselves. Thrawn's flagship had been repaired by this point, and the paint on the keel was glistening. Luke considered calling off their attack, but if they could get inside the base and radio a distress signal, then perhaps they could lure Thrawn to the surface and trap him. Mace liked this idea. It could work. Of course, both were unfamiliar with Grand Admiral Thrawn's tactics, so this sounded like a sound idea. They watched another explosion sound off as a pirate fighter kamikazed into the cave, detonating the ramparts and killing stormtroopers. From the tree line, more pirates moved in. It was a consolidated attack, one fueled by revenge. Mace told Luke to move, and they did, cutting down the few unlucky scout troopers who got in their way. Mace and Luke cut through the door and moved in, their amethyst and emerald sabers lighting the way down the dark corridors. The pirates were inside the same facilities, meaning that most of the other troopers were being redirected towards the mouth of the cave. The 2 Jedi then entered a hallway, where they found something confusing. Elite guards were present inside this base, and these type of troopers didn't just show up for anyone. 6 Praetorian guards ignited their stabs and marched forward. Just as Luke and Mace were about to fight them, a dozen stormtroopers rushed in behind them. These men were redirected by their commander to defend the room, so they didn't actually know the Jedi were here. Mace told Luke to get the troopers. He would start on the guards. They agreed and rushed in. They split off as blaster fire erupted and sabers collided. Luke's movement against the stormtroopers was much easier than his attack on the dark troopers several months before. Mace, on the other hand, deflected strikes at his body. He spun guards around and used the force to throw them into each other. He came to appreciate the metallic hand as he bashed the helmet of a guard open. Mace spun around, defending another attack before catching a jab with his open hand. He shoved back and collided with a guard, before using their momentum to kill another. Sabers and staves smashed together, as Luke finished off the stormtroopers with ease. He saw the 5 remaining Praetorians encircling Master Windu and moved in. Luke felt a sense of euphoria in this. He hadn't served with another Jedi like this before, and it was comforting. Yoda nor Ben would have been capable of this. He watched Master Windu work like magic, flinging a guard into another with the Force, and defending 3 more strikes from different opponents. Skywalker moved in, using his speed and aggression to his ability. He cut through unsuspecting guards until one of the remaining men turned to face him. Mace and Luke worked on their final opponents, clashing and parrying, allowing the Praetorians to expose themselves, leaving them open to be killed. Skywalker and Windu met at the end and moved on the room that was being defended. Once they entered, a sickening laugh echoed out of the chambers. The Jedi searched for any side of it, and they couldn't find anything. What they did see were various screens, showing the Imperial troopers on the surface defending themselves. In orbit, the Chimera shredded the pirate warship, and the 3 gladiators turned about and departed into hyperspace. The rest of the pirate vessels were forced to do the same, leaving the Chimera and the Victory destroyers to stand in the wreckage of their assault. Inside the caves, the rest of the pirate forces were killed off, and there were to be no survivors. Luke and Mace moved forward, using their sabers to lit the very dim chamber. Everything down here was very dark. They couldn't find any sight of the voice, but the individual was very familiar with Master Windu, calling him by name. As they reached the computer console so they could activate the distress signal, the ground rumbled. Out from it appeared a chamber, one holding a body. It activated or came to life or something, but a crimson saber ignited and charged the Jedi. Mace pushed Luke back and took the brunt of the hit before defending himself. Luke turned around and countered, acting quickly against this dark marauder. As the Jedi looked forward, another couple chambers lifted from the ground, and more marauders rushed at them. Before they could do anything to effectively counter, they were popped with green smoke. The laughing man from before rolled down from the ceiling, holding onto a retractable ladder. He smiled and skipped over to Mace Windu, poking him in the face and laughing again. He looked to Luke, noting how he reminded him of someone, before turning back and telling his marauders to fetch the Grand Admiral. His prizes awaited him. Mace recognized the voice, but he was really woozy. He couldn't see well because the poison had infected him and Luke. But he checked on young Skywalker first. He was already unconscious. The marauder standing over them moved out of the way and towards the exit, as the voice matched an all too familiar face. Mace couldn't believe his eyes, because it made an already unbelievable situation all the more unreal. Dr. Nuvo Vindi had been the architect of their capture, and he laughed over and again, watching his little rats fall unconscious. And that, my friends, is part 1 of 2 of this story. I hope you all enjoyed. Smash the like button, you know what to do. I'm not going to talk about the story because the story's not finished yet, so we're going to see what happens. I'm excited for you guys to see part 2. Part 2 will be out on Thursday, and full movie for the Sith Clone Wars Season 3 will also be out on Saturday, so make sure to check both those out. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.